All right, good morning, everybody. I appreciate you turning up for my talk here. I have a handful of slides, and then we're going to dive into a live coding session to get a first taste of what Spring Data is. Just a little intro about myself. My name's Greg Turnquist. I work on the Spring team at Pivotal. I've written a couple books, and I have a video tutorial coming out later this year on the subject of Spring Boot. And by the way, all the digital versions of those are like on sale for $10 right now. So the question is, it's 2016, and we've got some kind of entity structure that we have. We need to write queries. So why are we still writing things like select star from employee where first name equals %s, or maybe you're using JPA and you have to write something like this. People are coming out with newer tools to write kind of the same thing but in a different style. But nonetheless, when you go and build a system that has like over 200 queries, you start to get locked into the solution that you've picked. When instead of writing all this type of code, you could instead declaratively create something that does the exact same operation like that. What Spring Data provides is a sort of an abstraction layer. Initially, there was JDBC support in the Spring framework called JDBC template. When you get into non-relational data stores, which there's been an explosion of in the past 10 years, Spring Data has support for all these other various data stores, and there's more out there, in fact. And they've each adopted a template-based solution to offload the connection management aspects and all, but you still have to write it in its native query. JPA came out and provided a level of abstraction above that, but what Spring Data essentially does is puts another layer up above that, allowing you to use a more repository-based solution and kind of free you from having to write all those statements by yourself. So what I'm going to show you is, this is sort of a glimpse, maybe after the conference, if you go find my deck and look at it, you can look a little closer at it. But essentially, you declare the query that you want to do based on the names of the properties in your domain object. And you can pick the various attributes. You can combine stuff together. You can say, I want to find the first 10 items that match this particular criteria. Some of these are very data store specific, like an is null check is if you're going to do a relational data store check. So this is kind of the core underpinnings of it, but there's actually support for if you're into Java 8 stuff and you're using some of the latest Spring Framework support, you can have access to Java 8 streams. Give me a stream with that data and fish it out as it comes, or let me use the async support. And Spring Data even gives you support to do paging, like just give me 10 items at a time, or I want to do a sort operation. And then what's even cooler is that they're now coming out with soon support for Spring 5 and Project Reactor, so you can do reactive style queries where you can say, give me a mono or a flux. And if you don't know what that means, go look for the reactive talks by Stefan Modini at SpringOne, where you can say reactively just pull it out only as fast as the client's asking for it in a non-blocking style. With setting the groundwork there, I'm going to switch over and do a little live coding session. Now I realize you can't read this very well, and as soon as I'm going to create a project out of thin air, and then I'll zoom it up where you can actually see it. I'm going to use the IDE's version of start.spring.io. If you've ever seen Josh Long give a presentation, he'll call that like the kind of website to keep tucked under your pillow at night to use every time you build a new project. And I'm going to create a let's see, SpringOne platform, Spring Data. And we give a package. A system I like to build is something that we all like to do, and it's a payroll system. That's something we all love to do, is fill out expense reports. And for doing that, we need to track employee data. So I'm going to use Spring Boot 1.4. I'm going to use the Spring Boot dev tools, and I'll show you why in a moment. I'm going to use Project Lombok because I really don't like writing getters and setters in this day and age. I'm going to pick JPA just for demonstration, but you could actually write this against Redis, MongoDB, just about anything. And then finally, I need a user interface, but I don't actually feel like writing JavaScript today, so I think I'm going to use the Spring Data REST repositories solution. Intro to Spring Data. Okay, now let's go to let's zoom it up here a little. First, I'm going to open up my my class here. Okay, so I have one class here. So I've started off with a nice, this is an empty project. It's a Spring Boot application. So I'm just going to fire it up right away in debug mode, and this is where I'm going to use Spring Boot Dev Tools. Essentially, it's going to let me run this app, and every time I make a change to it, I just do a little refresh, and it's going to relaunch the application context and load it up here. Let me, let's fill this up here, make it look good so we can flip back and forth. Okay, so what I'm looking here at is basically nothing. So what I'm going to start off doing is, let's go define an employee class. In this case, I'm going to use Lombok to help generate the extra bits that I need, and we'll define a JPA entity class. Now we have to define a primary key, essentially. Let's see, we need some other fields. How about first name? Let's see, last name. And just for this simple system, we're going to say everyone's got some role on the team that they have to perform. Now the fun stuff with JPA is that you get roped into things like having to have empty constructor calls. So I just like to, put that away and say, okay, I'm going to keep that private. I don't want anybody to use it, but JPA will require that I have access to it, so you're all happy. Instead, I prefer to have something where, somebody can supply me with what they need. Let's see. So we should have enough there to define basically an employee. Now another piece is I need to declare one of those interfaces, and this is where Spring Data starts to shine. I'm going to declare the queries that I want, but I don't have to implement them because Spring Data is going to implement it for me. And the saying is that the code that you don't write has no bugs. So let's create an employee repository. And here I'm going to extend CRUD repository, which comes from Spring Data Commons. So I need to tell it what type of entity is this repository connected to, and by the way, what is the ID field that it's connected to? What type is it? And because I'm using Spring Data REST to serve this data up, I need to annotate it repository REST resource. Now if I just refresh the IDE, you're going to notice that the console down here scrolls a little bit and it'll have reloaded stuff. And I can come back here and I can click the refresh button and I see that there's now an employees mapping here, but I don't like clicking the refresh button all the time, so I'm going to use Spring Boot's live reload server to refresh the page for me every time there's an update. So I can click on here and find out that there's no employees actually stored in the system yet, so that doesn't make for a very exciting demo. So let's go back and preload a little bit of data, and then we can start brainstorming some queries. So let's see, what you notice here, this is where I now first get to grab hold of that interface that I just declared and start using it. And you're going to see that I have several operations at my fingertips that I inherited from CRUD repository, a base interface. There's a save operation, delete, does a particular entity even exist, a find all operation. And that's kind of like really basic and I can get started with it, but then I'm going to find out it's not enough, I need to write some custom operations. Let's see, who's on the payroll? We have, let's see, we got Frodo Baggins works for us, that's good. We also happen to have Bilbo Baggins. Now, depending on what his job title is, that could be good or bad. So if I can preload some data here, So I can zoom in here and suddenly I can see, oh, I've got some data here that I can look at. A nice embedded format. I can go actually zoom into this one particular employee and say, let me just focus in on this piece of data, and we look at that. Okay, that's nice. But you see at this point, basically I have either find one or I have find all. Either give me one record or give me all the records, but I need something in the middle. So at this point is where you start saying, well, I need to write some custom queries and do stuff. And this is where it starts to kick in. So down here in my employee repository, I'm going to go down here and say, I'm going to look for, give me a list of employees, and then find by last name. So right here, what Spring Data does is it goes and it parses this entire expression. First of all, it looks at the return type of what you're trying to do. And this is where it can have support for either basic collections, streams, the new reactor types. And then it also takes this expression and takes it apart, and it uses property management. So it knows to go look at the employee record definition, if you will, and then look for the last name property, and then match it up with whatever's been fed to it. And I don't have to write any code for it. Now, one extra thing I have to do because I'm using Spring Data REST is the way Java mangles the method signatures, I need to actually declare the name of the parameter that it's going to serve it up on. So I'm just going to use a Q parameter for short. So if I go refresh my system here, let's see if we got that. It doesn't look like anything's changed, but if I actually scroll to the bottom here, in my hypermedia set of links that I have down here in this HAL formatted document, there's a new link down here called search. And if I actually click on the search thing, it's going to show me this finder that I just defined. So it'll give me a hypermedia access to actually invoke that method. Now, if I was writing the Java code to interact directly with it, I could just ask for a copy of that interface and interact with it directly. But here's a convenient way that I can give it a nice UI look and feel. Now, if I click on that, nothing happens because browsers don't speak URI template. If you look at this, you notice that it has a certain format. There's curly brackets wrapping the thing, and it says it's templated. So this is something where browsers don't have support for this. I don't know if they ever will, but I can go mend it and do, Q equals bagins. And it gives me back a list of everybody with bagins. And in this case, I'm getting back a list. I could go write, what are some other queries? How about, list employee, find by role. In this case, I'm going to look in the employee table and I want to match on a different field. Okay, so I'm going to back up. So now I have a find by role. Let's see, are there any burglars around here? Yes, we happen to have one burglar. Now, no payroll system is complete without adding a highly critical component, a manager. So let's do another, long ID. Let's just give this a single name for simplicity. And do a little mapping here. We have one manager will map to many employees. In this case, I'm going to map it by the manager property on the other entity. Yes, the question is, can a Java method go call this? And absolutely. What I'm doing up here at the top, just to load data up here, is I'm actually asking for the Spring IOC container to hand me a copy of employee repository, and I can use whatever methods it has. Just for demonstration purposes, I'm exposing it through this Spring Data REST to generate hypermedia, but the whole idea is you can get that and call that method directly. So the question is if I want to pick and choose which repositories are being exposed as REST endpoints and which are not, what's the most effective way to do that? And actually it's contained in this annotation. There's a simple Boolean flag, exported, true or false. So you can go and say, this one, no. And that's what you do like for your user table or your password table where your passwords are stored. Do not expose those to the public. Let me finish creating his constructor calls. And I need to define an interface. Okay, the other half of this is we need to relate. On the other side, we have a many-to-one relationship to map here. So we need a manager, and we're going to initialize it in the constructor call. Okay, so having updated this, it's probably going to flag my initialization code saying, well, where's the managers here? So I'm going to ask the Spring to inject a manager repository. Let's create a new manager. How about Gandalf? Sounds like a good manager type guy. So refresh all that stuff. Let's go back up. Let's go zoom back up to the top level of the hypermedia. So now that I've added a new repository, a new root aggregate of data, I now get a new top level link to navigate to. I can drill down into that and I can see the same kind of look and feel I would be expecting to see this one particular manager listed in an embedded container. I can zoom in to look at that one specific manager. And now I can see there's another relationship-based link down here, employees. And all this stuff was gleaned by reading the entity record that I defined, the attributes. And so I can navigate and find what employees are managed by this manager. And it's going to show me these two particular employees. I can also navigate in the other direction because I set it up as a bidirectional relationship. And in this case, if I'm looking at one employee, I can say, who's the employee's manager? I can go in the other direction. Now we can go write queries that can actually cross through these relationships declaratively. So, there's this concept in Hollywood where I want to go hire this actor. I need to go find who's his agent. So, and this is the corporate side of things. So this is like, I need the developer that knows something about rings. Who's his manager that I can go talk to him and see if I can get some time over target to work on this task item. So I'm looking for a manager, but I'm looking for a manager who find by one of his employees role contains some attribute. Yep. So in this sense, what Spring Data is going to do with this method, it's going to navigate by properties. So the first token it sees is employees. So it's going to go to manager, employees, query across the employees relationship, and then go look at the role property inside the employee record for a match. And in this case, I'm not looking for an exact match. I'm looking for something that is like a substring match. So if I refresh, let's start from the top here. So I go into managers. I can see a quick preview at the top. Down here, I can look in the search box to find out, what search fields are. Find by employees role contains. So I'm looking for somebody that knows an employee with rings, and I get back, here's this manager.
Like a syntax error, I guess your current interface. But let's say you put
So the question is, what if you goof this up here and it's like I did something hokey and I didn't do that right? What's going to happen? Stack trace. Uh-oh, what happened? Let's see. No property contain for found type string, and this is the path that it trekked down. It went down from manager.employees to role, and it said, well, I saw the word contain. Is that a sub-property of role? Because in this case, we know role is a string, and it says, well, string doesn't have a property called contain. And so I can look back at it and say, oh, it's supposed to be contains. And this is the same deal. What if I had said, what if I type roles? In this case, it gives me a very informative message here. No property roles found in employee. And it actually has a little bit of intelligence. Did you mean to put role? I say yes. Okay. At this point, I haven't spent any time writing a Hibernate query, writing a JDBC query, or writing a MongoDB query, and I'm able to, I can think of a lot of business case problems that I'm trying to solve. I can go, if I want to work on the data set, let's, introduce another manager. Let's spread the data out a little. Maybe I need to find, maybe I'm looking for I need a list of managers, but I'm searching based on last name. How about I call that a string? That's what I call proof that this is a live demo. Okay, so okay. It said something about here, resource not found exception, resource not found, and that's because the live reload server has me pegged at a particular query that may have changed here. So, okay, so let's refresh that one and look at the finders that we've exposed so far. So find the latest one, we had find by employees role contains, and we have find by employees last name. So let's check the last name here. Let's go look for Baggins. Q equals Baggins. And wait a minute, this is kind of hokey. Why do I get the same manager listed twice? That's because I have two different employees with the name Baggins. So in this case, I'm going to say find distinct. I want to find a distinct manager based on that. And when I start doing like distinct calls, it takes me back to this system I built for 10 years where I wrote like 200 plus queries, and by the end of that I could write left outer joins and stuff in my sleep, and I am so happy to be able to throw that out the window and do this instead. Because the other thing is that becomes refactorable. It's like you're going to go out and update your code. Okay, find distinct by employee's last name. So in this case, give me a distinct user or a distinct manager. And so this is kind of the, I want to get your feet wet, give you a taste of what Spring Data has to offer. And when you say golly, that's something I could have, saved me a week of coding effort with just 2 hours of thinking of business requirements, then you're able to switch over and start doing, coding value for your enterprise. No, so the question is, this doesn't change based on what data store you're using, and that is correct 95% of the way. So things like, find by property is absolutely true. If you do something like a is null check, this is one of the weirdest things I had to learn about relational databases, is that null does not equal null. So in SQL, there's an actual is null check. So they have support for that to write that, but if you go over to MongoDB, you're gonna have to go rewrite that because they don't have the same paradigm in MongoDB. But for most of the stuff that you're doing, it's going to work fine. And if you look at the reference documentation for each of the data stores, they'll show the specific support that they have. I want to wrap up the presentation here and tell you that if you're interested in this, if you're salivating about Spring Data, go find some time today and go to spring.io/guides, and there's a filter box at the and type in data, and you're going to see over a dozen guides that are aimed at JPA, MongoDB, Gemfire. I can't remember if we have Redis on there yet, and some of them are based on just purely the Java side, and then there's a complementary one that actually shows the Spring Data REST stuff that I've been using here. But those are all designed to be, read from top to bottom in about 30 minutes. We also have several talks at SpringOne platform from this whole Spring Data team: Oliver Gierke, Christoph Strobel, Mark Paluk, and John Bloom. And also, when you're not going to one of those talks, absolutely carve out time to come to my 5 o'clock talk this afternoon on Spinnaker, a continuous deployment tool. I don't know if there are any other, we may have a minute or so for any other questions. Okay, so the question is, if you have a complex domain model, and for instance, you're using views, things like that, that's a situation where you can actually define an entity mapped onto the view. That's one aspect of it. Instead of it pointing at a table, you can reference the view. There's other times when you're like, this works for like 80% of my business cases. 80% of the queries I have to write are very simple in this nature. But then I get into some of those data warehousing queries. Spring Data also comes with a @query annotation, so you can declare your method. It doesn't matter what the name of it is. You define what the return type is and what the input types. But you put @query, and inside quotation marks, you write out that detailed, complex query, and it will execute that instead of generating the query for you. So you're saying, what is the difference between if your application domain model and your database model are different? Well, to some degree, you have to map the entity onto what structure it is, because in this example, I'm using Spring Data JPA. JPA talks to the entities. You have to say this class, by default, it was using the names of the class to map to it, but there's an @table annotation to say this is what it needs to go to. You can go to every field inside your class and say this class maps to this column of table or view that I'm interacting with. So JPA gives you the expressivity to actually declare how JPA is going to interact with it. But essentially, we're leveraging JPA to do this for us. The whole idea is this gets us out of the job of having to write the JPA query ourselves, if at all possible. So I don't know if that totally answers your question. You may need to talk offline and look at the exact problem that you're trying to solve to see if there's something more specific to your situation. Say it one more time. Okay, so the question is, does it support stored procedures and functions? There is stored procedure support in Spring Data JPA. That's a separate section of the reference documents, but there's absolute support for that. One of the aspects I was demonstrating was what we call the repository solution. There's also, you get access to a JPA template if you wanted to use that directly. And then the other part is you have stored procedures that you can craft as well. So if you go to the projects.spring.io/springdatajpa, you can go read the reference documents for how to use those. Oh yeah, so the question is, what about date columns? Like, can you do a find date between? And they absolutely have support for dates. They have Jota time support, Java 8 date support. So they have support for a lot of these standard types that exist. And they even have the situation, if you're running into that you need to write some kind of custom converter that Spring Data needs to use on a certain type of column, you can go craft that class and inject it into Spring to use that as well. Well, this happens to be using Hibernate and JPA, but so in this case I'm using Spring Data JPA. It's a JPA-based solution, and it's using Hibernate for this example. So I don't know if. So in this demo I'm using JPA, and the implementation of JPA I'm using is Hibernate solution. I need to wrap it up here because we only have 30 minutes. So if you want to talk to me, meet me outside. Thanks everybody for coming.